everybody, it's Santa Claus here at the Peter Criss signing. It's his birthday tomorrow. He's 80 years old. Make sure to watch the CD guy, Johnny Z, right now. Ho, ho, ho!
Well, I'm not going to be able to give you guys a better intro than that. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and Kissmas has come early. I just got back from Rough Trade in New York City. I was at the signing event for Peter Criss's new self-titled studio album out today. Really exciting stuff here. Let's dive in. First off, a little bit about the signing at Rough Trade. It was a raw, nasty, rainy morning, but like Peter said, back in '78, he can't stop the rain, so wasn't going to let that get in the way of me having my copy signed, and this was a really great fan-friendly experience. You know, unfortunately, there were no photos allowed, no additional items signed either, but Peter took his time with everybody, which was really great. You know, super nice guy, and I got to ask Peter a question that I've been wanting the answer for a while. So I asked him about the infamous Tom Snyder interview back in 1979, where Kiss were on, and Ace, of course, went rogue, stole the show, right? And Gene and Paul were just fuming, and it's still so funny. It's top-tier comedy. But so I asked him, what was the situation like backstage after the interview? You know, what were Gene and Paul like? I'm sure they were irate. Was there a fight? You know, what happened? And Gigi, his wife, who was standing next to him, said, "Oh, I'm sure they were just having fun." And Peter goes, "No, there was a fight." And so what Peter told me what happened was, so after the interview, apparently Ace passed out. And so, because Gene and Paul couldn't yell at Ace, they just started yelling at him instead. And so, Peter had to fight Gene and Paul, and Ace was totally passed out, missed the whole fight. But I told him, I'm like, so Ace is passed out, so they're just going to yell at you instead? He goes, yeah. So I thought that was pretty funny, and in the end he said, well, it was time that we took control anyway. So thought that was really funny. You know, Peter Criss, great guy, fantastic to finally get to meet the cat, and really glad I got to ask him that question. Funny anecdote there as well, and a little bit of history. All right, let's talk about the new record here by Peter Criss, self-titled here. Just some fast album facts off the top. This is the 6th full-length studio album by Peter Criss, released today on December 19th, 2025 via Silver Cat Records, and it's the follow-up to One for All from 2007. The personnel on this album, of course, you have Peter on vocals and percussion, Billy Sheehan and Matthew Montgomery, aka Piggy D from Marilyn Manson's band, on bass, John Five and Mike McLaughlin on guitar, and Paul Shaffer on piano. The record also features backing vocalists Dennis and Sharon Collins and Kat Manning of Cat 5, and it was co-produced by Peter and Barry Pointer. Of course, Barry Pointer has worked in the past with the likes of, you know, Ozzy, John Five, Motley Crue, and more. Time for John's 5. Not John 5, but rather my top 5 favorite songs from the new album here. Gonna get things started with the album opener. My favorite track has got to be Rockin' Rock and Roll. Very fun opener to the album that sets the tone really well. You know, Peter's swing style of drumming is still there, and that gives this track a bit of a, you know, familiarity to it as well. And it's something that definitely would not sound out of place on his '78 solo album or a record like Out of Control. And, you know, just with aged vocals on here from Peter, and doesn't quite have that rasp in his voice anymore, but he sounds good nonetheless. And I get some serious hooked on rock and roll vibes from this track. It has the same kind of energetic, loose feel to it, and I think it's a really good sign, you know, to kick off the record with a song where you can tell that Peter's working with the right people this time, featuring Billy Sheehan and Paul Shaffer. Number 2, I'm going to go with Murder. Great cut right in the middle of the album here, and for some reason this track reminds me a lot of Blue Moon Over Brooklyn, and you could tell me that this was a leftover from Peter's 1994 record, and, you know, I would totally believe it. You know, vocally, Peter is crooning throughout, and what really stood out to me on this track is the guitar solo. Hands down the best solo on this record, a real scorcher for sure, from Mike McLaughlin, a longtime member of Peter's solo band. And lyrically, of course, Peter is not renowned for his songwriting skills, but these are some of my favorite lyrics on the whole album, belted out with a crooning delivery here, which adds a really interesting ripple to many of the songs on this record, where it's upbeat, but also a bit ominous sounding as well. Number 3, gonna go with Creepy Crawlers, of course, the lead single. And, you know, it's funny that after the release of this track as a single, the band Creepy Crawlers made a song called Peter Criss, and it's really cool and really funny, so you should definitely check it out. But, you know, it makes sense. This would be one of my favorites from the record, considering that I've had the most time with it. And this song was a bit of a tough sell at first, but it's a grower for sure. I was definitely caught off guard by the song's darker vibe and atmosphere. I can hear a real Alice Cooper meets Lou Reed type of influence on this song, and honestly, it sounds like something that would have fit on, one of the more recent Alice Cooper albums with, a more horror rock approach here. Definitely a song that's out of character for Peter, but he makes it work alongside John 5 collaborating on this track. Kind of a strange choice, I would say, for a lead single, considering that, it's an outlier on this record. None of the other songs really sound like this, but, I think after a few listens, I definitely, could not get it out of my head. So it makes perfect sense that in terms of sound, this was released on Halloween, right? Definitely has that, kind of hard tinged vibe to it, but definitely different for Peter Criss, but really enjoyable stuff as well. So yeah, it's a song that took a few listens for me, but, I thoroughly enjoy it now. And so going into this record, I didn't know what to expect. Were we going to get a whole record of songs in this style or not? Turns out not. This song is one of one on the album, but I think it really stands out for those reasons. Number 4, going to go with For the Money. Kind of ironic that a member of Kiss would write a song called For the Money, but nevertheless, I love Peter's unique drumming on this track. It's front and center in the mix and immediately recognizable, and he has such a distinct feel behind the kit that no one can really replicate. His playing is still full of personality, and this is another upbeat, high-energy song with fun, tongue-in-cheek lyrics that fit perfectly with the bouncy, infectious rhythm, and the chorus is especially catchy, right, elevated by memorable backing vocals that really stick with you after the song ends, and there's a pretty cool, confident groove running throughout this entire track, driven by deep-rooted, thick bass lines, and Peter also opts for a smoother vocal delivery here, which is an interesting contrast to the older, raspier style, but the guitar work is a definite highlight as well, with a killer solo that cuts right through the mix. And rounding out my top 5 here, I'm going to go with Cheaper to Keep Her. This is another really fun song with an upbeat riff and more excellent guitar work, and, for an album that features John 5 on a few tracks, it's Mike McLaughlin who really shines on this record and steals the show here. Lyrics are fun, and the chorus is a total earworm as well. Peter still shows a lot of personality on this album and in his writing, and honestly, this is one of the songs on this record with the most re-listenable qualities to it in terms of being memorable. I think it's a solid representation of the entire record. It's simple in the best way, fun, lighthearted, but still with that classic Catman attitude and swagger. Overall, I'm going to give this album a solid 7 out of 10. On this channel, we love the Cat, but admittedly, my expectations were a bit low for this album, given how One for All turned out, but Peter came through here with his rock and roll record that he'd been promising for a really long time, and lots of tracks on here wouldn't sound out of place on his 78 solo album, which is a compliment, by the way. I know a lot of people aren't crazy about his 78 solo record. They consider it to be the worst of the 4. For me personally, it's my second favorite, just behind Ace's, so yeah, love his work on that record. I think it's really unique and kind of it defines what those albums should have been, which are unique and distinct to each guy. So yeah, when I compare it to the 78 solo album, that's a compliment here, although I will say some of the songs on here rock a bit harder than that album as a whole. And I think, when it comes down to, Peter's solo catalog, there's a lot of hits and a lot of misses there, but this is really solid stuff. Peter sounds energized and focused, and he's working with people who steered him in the right direction. I wouldn't say the tracks with John 5, that he's featured on are some of John 5's most inspired work, but Mike McLaughlin really injects so much life into this record with scorching and memorable solos throughout. And, of the songs that I mentioned, those are the memorable, tracks for me. And there's definitely a few that don't really stand out that I wasn't wild about, like Walking on Water or Justice. But in general, I think it's a much better final album, assuming this is Peter's final album, than One for All was in just about every single way. Production on here, I think, can be hit or miss at times. That was my only other critique. There are some songs that sound, more polished than others, and it sounds like a lot of work was done on Peter's voice at times. Then other times, the songs sound a little rougher around the edges, kind of a step above demo quality. But at its core, it's a fun record with some really catchy tunes, and I know not everyone will like it, and there'll be people who are harsher on it than others, but I think if you're a fan of Peter Criss and you like his style of drumming and his solo work for the most part, you'll find something to enjoy on this album. And also important to remember not to take releases like this for granted. If you would have told me at the beginning of the year that Peter Criss would be making a new album in 2025, I would not have believed you, but I also would not have believed you if you would have told me that, by the end of 2025, Ace Frehley would be gone, so the point here is it's important to enjoy these legends while they're still here. So that wraps up this video here, sharing my thoughts on the new Peter Criss studio album here. An album that, like I said, if you would have told me at the beginning of the year we were getting a Peter Criss record, I would have been really surprised. But I'm glad that we have it here, and you can see my signature here. Met Peter earlier today at the signing at Rough Trade. Great experience, and I never do unboxings here on the channel because I never actually have the CD to show when I review it. I usually always have to listen on streaming until my copy arrives, but I've got the CD CD here, so you can see on the back, you got the track listing here. Open it up on the inside, liner notes, and you can see the personnel on this record as well. That's really cool, some art on the inside. So I wish this came in a jewel case. I'm not a fan of these flimsy digipacks, but it is what it is, right? Wanted to share my thoughts here on the new Peter Criss record. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comment section below what are your thoughts on my review, and what did you think of the new Peter Criss album? I want to hear from you. Until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.